Welcome to Digestible Academia, a blue sky thinking podcast where we break down complex academic research into something a bit more digestible. Each week, we will choose a topic to discuss and do a deep dive into some of the most interesting articles published on blueskythinking.com about that topic. We'll be discussing the findings of the research and how it's relevant to you. I'm Chloe Lane, and I'm joined by my co-host, Kerry Ruffle.
Hi, Chloe.
How are you, Kerry?
I'm,
How's your week been?
you always get into a new year and you think, oh gosh, January always seems to drag. It's the month that's endless, but somehow we're coming into February and I don't know where the time's gone.
Oh, I'm the opposite. January has
Really?
dropped so much. I feel like it's January 68th. Honestly.
It's funny, isn't it? I just feel like, well, yeah, Christmas was a long time ago. When we did we wrapped up the podcast before Christmas and we did those episodes, and then we said we were going to take a little break into the new year. That does feel like it was a long time ago, but yeah,
Yes.
now we're sort of at the beginning of February, and I feel like I've blinked and missed it. I don't quite know how that happens, but
Well, it has
here
been
we
very
are.
busy month. Very, very busy. I don't know whether you found that. It's been very hectic.
I think the
And also-
start to the year always is, isn't it? You always sort of hit the ground running, the whole sort of new year, new me, whether it's, work stuff, whether it's personal stuff. You've always got, goals in mind and everyone's really sort of keen to get on with them. Everyone comes
Sure.
back with this new sort of lust for life. But yeah, you burn out by the time you get to the end of January and everyone wants a holiday again.
Yeah, I mean, a lot's happened actually in January. I mean, we've got a new US president for one.
We do, we
That's a
do,
huge thing.
and we talked about it a little bit. So our previous podcast, as you know, because you were there, we looked at sort of how to be better in 2025, how to be better leaders, how to do business better. Obviously, topics like Trump come into that as well. But that sort of harks to the whole discussion around sort of what you're going to do in 2025 that was different to what you're going to do before. Um, that the whole discussion around sort of like we just talked about doing things better, hitting the ground running, making sure that you can improve upon things before. And the year ahead, a new US president notwithstanding, the year ahead is going to be one of significant change and challenge.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard many people say that actually, that it's going to be a year of, big change. Um, and with big change often comes a lot of difficult conversations.
Yeah. Um,
Um,
you see a lot of companies that we talked about it in the previous podcast, trying to sort of change tack and keep pace with the pace of change that's happening at the moment. And whether that is, for example, trying to do the right thing on DEI policies because the focus there is shifting and working out what they want to do, or even things that have been around for years, like the constant advancements in tech and AI and how that is shifting people's jobs and what they're doing. And with all of this change, businesses have to adapt and change tack and try and do something a bit differently to try and stay competitive. And with that comes, restructuring and bringing in new people that can meet the new demands, but also potentially even letting go of people as well and closing down different arms of businesses so that they can, focus on the things that are going to keep them going in the year ahead and the years to come. And that was a
mm,
topic we talked about in a little bit of detail on the last podcast with one of our academics.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, already there's been, companies have announced job cuts and things like that. I mean, Trump's announced buyout offers to
Yeah.
more than 2 million employees, 2
Mhm.
million. Um, and
It's a ludicrous figure, isn't it?
it's insane. It says in this article, like the decision affects two-thirds of the federal workforce and is likely to be the greatest single job reduction in US history. That is huge.
I mean, I don't have the words to describe that, but yeah, certainly new president comes in, all change. How you tackle that level of job loss and restructure is it's unfathomable. Like you say, it's not occurred before. This is the biggest change in US history potentially,
Yeah.
if it does carry through. So, whether you're dealing with things on such a wide scale like that, or whether you're a smaller company looking at changing tack to keep pace with whether it's regulation or policy or tech advancements, the you know the discussion there is the same. How do you do it effectively? How do you do it smoothly? How do you keep your business afloat? How do you let go of people in the right way so that it doesn't come back to bite you or cause you any undue stress? And also, how do you protect your workforce? How do you look after the people that are remaining? Because with any change in letting people go, whether it's, potentially 2 million like Trump's looking to do, that's a huge amount of change to put on the people that have managed to make the cut and are staying behind.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's that whole like survivor's guilt almost
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
well of like we weren't the ones that were let go. We should have been, or not that we should have been, but it's not really fair. And it's having those really difficult conversations, but also sort of maintaining that morale of the people that are left.
Yeah.
It's a very complex topic, and it's hard for any manager, I think, to, give that bad news to someone, especially
Yeah.
when it affects their whole life.
This is it. And we talk in numbers. That 2 million number is it's huge. I'm
Yeah.
stating the obvious here, but that 2 million number is huge. And it's come down from on high and it's being filtered through various departments and government organizations. And there are very real people who are in the jobs that are now going to be taken away. But also,
Mhm.
there's very real people that are now going to be charged with making the decisions of who to get rid of.
Yeah.
What roles no longer make the cut, which people no longer need to have a position. And that's a huge amount of stress. It's a decision that, it isn't entirely on them. It's not like they woke up that morning thinking they were going to reduce workforce. It's an order that's come down from on high that they've got to enact. And it's the same for, middle managers anyway. When that order comes in to, restructure things, and that means letting people go, you've got a lot of pressure on your hands to do what you're being told by your boss and enact your job. But also, it's a huge mental strain. You work with these people, you know them. There's a very human element to it. So, yes, people are losing jobs, and that's very sad. And there's a responsibility there to look after them. But who's looking after the manager that's in charge of sort of making the order and is directly in the firing line?
Yeah. Yeah, so we discussed this a little bit last week in our podcast episode um, about how to sort of break this bad news to employees. And we mentioned research from Marjo-Riitta Diehl, who is Professor of Organisation and Management at Aalto University School of Business. So her research revolves around breaking this bad news to employees, how best to do it. And as she points out in her research, these company-wide changes, such as layoffs, pay cuts, etc., can really damage that relationship between employees and their organization. And, when that information is potentially hidden or just conveyed incorrectly, it can really destroy that trust
Hmm.
between the employee and the organization they're working in.
Yeah. So then, comes back to, how it falls on the manager and how they act in that scenario and how they're prepared to act in that scenario too. Because it's essential that they're able to convey that information to their employees in a way that is efficient and is to the point, but also, keeps that human element at heart. There is a very logical process to getting rid of people, but that it's important that there is some empathy there. These are people's lives, their careers. People connect very much so with their jobs as well as trying to pay the bills.
Yeah,
So it's
cool.
important, when passing on information that could potentially cause people distress, that you do it in the right way.
Yeah.
So her research was conducted alongside colleagues at the Catalunya Lisbon School of Business and Economics, the University of Waterloo, and with senior advisors at Travers Smith LLP, and the firm's former managing partner as well. So this study is great because it's got the focus from industry and the expertise and the real lived experiences there, but also it's got a real spread of academic expertise and insight behind it as well.
Yeah, and it also involves a lot of people. I mean, it involved three different studies. The first one was a survey of 1,795 employees the company was undergoing a major restructuring.
Mhm.
Um, and the second study was a field survey of 174 workers undergoing layoffs and pay cuts. And then there was also an experiment. So this did involve a huge amount of people that they took this data from.
Yeah. So if you are listening to us and you are in the position of that middle management point where you might unfortunately at some point have to let go of staff, a study like this is a really useful one in understanding how it can be done effectively, how you can protect yourself, how you can protect senior management, that are leaving your company as well, setting them up in the best position possible to then progress their careers in the right way. It's a really important piece of work. And so that's why in this episode, we decided that actually, the best way forward is to sit down with Mayo and get her to talk in detail about what the study is, how it works, what the key findings are, and importantly, what can be taken from it and how industry can learn.
Without further ado, here is Marjo-Riitta Diehl. Marjo-Riitta Diehl, thank you so much for joining us today. Um,
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you. So obviously we've done a bit of an overview with your research, but I think it'd be great if you could give a bit of an introduction to yourself, and maybe the key findings of your research and maybe your motivations for doing this research in the first place.
Yes, of course, with pleasure. So I'm an associate professor at the Department of Management Studies at Aalto University School of Business in Finland. And my academic journey has taken me from the LSE in the UK, where I did my doctoral studies, to Germany, and then to finally back to Finland, where I'm originally from. And right from my thesis times, from my early research times, I've been interested in issues of organizational justice and fairness. And then, of course, these oftentimes pop up, or we are aware of them, and we become conscious of these types of issues when there's some difficult times in organizations. And this might be, for example, situations where there is some bigger organizational change initiatives going on, or change associated with layoffs, for example, or that lead to layoffs. These are typically situations where justice issues are very much on the fore, or fairness issues, or simply being something like difficult performance evaluations or feedback situations on the whole.
Mhm.
And then actually it was only after my doctoral studies that I started to really dive into this, but these issues were already somehow present in my doctoral studies. But then in my first research project as a professor, I was diving into situations of layoffs, and fairness issues, justice issues in those situations. And this research has then, I've been doing research in this area ever since, in different organizations, and also some theoretical papers and reviews on this area. And now we have a book chapter coming up with my colleague on a book which is on organizational change, and we've written a chapter on giving feedback or sharing feedback, interactional justice. So this interpersonal situations where you face employees in organizational change situations, and how managers can best deal with those situations.
Okay, and so in putting this together, what sort of information gathering did to be able to create your findings? Were you looking, for example, sort of into particular companies and the practices that managers take? Was there a study with a sample size? What can you tell me?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It is not easy, like if we now think of layoff situations, it's not an easy context to study.
Yeah.
Because you would need to have the lucky stroke to be there and have access at this very point in time when organization is going on, when there is such a change going on in the organization, or getting access or starting to negotiate access into an organization at the time when they are announcing layoffs, is also a bit challenging, because typically organizations don't want to get publicity or in this type of situations.
Mhm.
However, I have managed to collect data in one Finnish organization, so it's like, should I say, case study data that was undergoing layoffs, big organizational change initiatives that involved layoffs. And I was able to interview and survey managers in this organization. And it was an organization that is actually operating in several countries. So it was the Finnish country organization, and it's quite a big organization. So I had for my survey something like 250 respondents, and then I did many interviews with managers involved who had first-hand experience. And I think the survey data is as such interesting, but the interviews in particular were very enlightening. But in addition to this, we have then with my co-authors and colleagues collected also data through online platforms where we have scenarios. So we present scenes in which the person, the respondent, is required to make a tough decision or implement some organizational change initiative, and then there are different options. What would you do and how would you do it? So this is one type of data collection. And then in another project with my doctoral student, we have collected data also in an organization that was undergoing a very significant change, or should I say even transformation, business transformation. But that was only qualitative data. I'm saying now only qualitative, but it just means that the sample sizes are rather small. And this was in the Netherlands, so we collected this data in the Netherlands, qualitative data, interview data with managers. And we, in this case, we were able to collect the data also longitudinally. So we actually started the data collection already before the change or the transformation was known for widely in the organization. So when they were kind of planning for it, so we were able to interview the managers then. They knew that something was coming, but not exactly what and what the implications were. That was not yet known. And then we were able to interview them later when they were actually implementing the change. And this longitudinal element gave us quite some interesting insights.
As you say, you've surveyed and interviewed so many different people about this.
Mm.
And based on the findings of your research and your own expertise, do you have any advice for managers on how to share this difficult news that you've just mentioned, such as layoffs or performance-related feedback?
Yeah.
How to share it with employees, and also how important is the timing of delivering this bad news, would you say?
Well, first of all, I think it's good for us to recognize that delivering bad news is of some kind is kind of a normal and at the same time critical part of organizational life. So giving feedback, telling people how they can perform, how they can improve their performance, for example, that's kind of a nearly like everyday business. Layoffs are luckily not an everyday business. So sharing critical or bad news is kind of part of a managerial job. There's no way out of it. And of course, the implications are somewhat different if we are talking about giving a negative performance evaluation versus having to lay off people. But irrespective, it is a tough situation for the manager. It's not easy to tell somebody or be critical of somebody's performance for most managers. And one has to also say that managers themselves, you get a routine also in these types of tasks. So it's also a learning journey for managers to deliver bad news or critical news. But we do have extensive evidence from my own studies, but also from research from my respected colleagues from various countries all over the world, that if we are able to deliver bad news of any type in a manner that is that displays dignity and respect, it will make the task easier for both parties, both the recipient as well as the manager, him or herself. And as I said, I'm an organizational justice scholar, so interpersonal justice, how fairly we meet the person at the front of us is very important there. And in terms of the timing, I think if something is cooking in the organization, some change initiative or layoffs, it's of course a very fertile ground for rumors and for grapevine type of message that is running through the organization. So, but at the same time, also, of course, there is some preparation and some secrecy which is needed and justifiable. And before you really know what's going to happen, maybe you don't want to, or you can't even share all the news. But as soon as it's possible to share the news, I would recommend to do it definitely, and have the highest possible person, the person who is really responsible for this whatever initiative or change it is that the bad news are about, should be doing that. Then if it's a performance feedback, that too. I mean, the closer you do it to the actual failure or mistake or whatever is the issue, the most likely it is going to be going to have an impact, and is going to also the person is going to understand what you are talking about. So annual performance review, where you might then forget about these things, or they are not anymore so fresh in your mind. That's maybe not the ideal way to go. So I would recommend, if there are issues in performance, address it as quickly as possible and as constructively as possible. And then oftentimes also the person, him or herself, realizes that, hey, something was going wrong, or that there, and I could have done that differently. And finding a way together how to improve things is then easier and more likely.
I mean, I'm sure that in your research and the companies that you've had the pleasure of being able to discuss this with, you've seen sort of there must be sort of common steps and common practices that they undertake in the situation where they're having to let staff go, downsize and have those layoffs. So there's certainly a very practical element to delivering bad news, and the things that you have to have in place in order to make that change happen, and to put staff through the process of then being let go. But there's an emotional side to this as well, as you acknowledged earlier, both for the staff that are going, but also the people that are staying. And as you said a moment ago, when that rumor mill starts as well, and people don't know what's happening, there's a lot of, then again, heightened emotions, a lot of uncertainty, perhaps some backlash as well. So what would you say are perhaps the best ways or the best considerations for leaders to have in mind when it comes to emotional support, whether it's during the tough conversations of sitting down with employees to deliver bad news, or just of guiding them through the change process as it's coming?
Yeah, that's a very big and important question. I think.
And I'm sure it doesn't have an easy answer.
No, and to be honest, I like to think of it in that way, that the preparation actually starts when the times are good. So
Okay.
if you have trusting relationships, if you have fairness in the organ, if employees can trust that people here are treated fairly, this will carry very far when you are then actually facing tough times and when you have to make tough decisions. So one main outcome of organizational fairness is that it reduces uncertainty. And when there are tough times and when you need to do tough decisions, if you can rely that, hey, well, on the whole, things function in this organization fairly, I can trust these people, and then it will also help in this type of difficult situations. But then, of course, when you actually face this tough situation, it's hard, and it is an from my experience, extremely more emotional experience than I would have imagined before I did my interviews. And not only for the employees, I've heard these stories about employees, the recipients of the bad news, crying, taking revenge in ways that one doesn't want to think about, but also managers, and in particular younger managers who are doing this for the first time, having sleepless nights and being very, very stressed about it, and not even wanting to tell in what organization they work, because the reputation of an organization going through layoffs is too tough on them. So it is a really tough, emotionally hard situation for all parties, and I think organizations should acknowledge this. And when you are implementing change, it's not only the employees and both the victims and of layoffs and the survivors that you have to think of, but you also have to think of the managers and the support that they need, and the training they might need for going through this. tough talks. And they do require a lot of, if I use the term emotional intelligence, so being aware of your own emotions and somehow regulating those and being aware of the emotions of the recipients and trying to support them or helping them to regulate their emotions and go them through. So it's a act of self-intelligence and self-awareness and diplomacy and also patience in many ways. So definitely, I think it requires compassion. So listening, taking the time to be there in this meeting with the person when you're telling the bad news, even if there is anger, being able to take that anger or the tears or the sorrow, the worries, the blame that comes there. So being prepared for that. And that it might come, it's likely to come in some form or another, and then still being able to be compassionate, take the emotions, hear the emotions, validate the emotions, understand them. I think that's a key thing in this actual communication situation. Express your sympathy, express your appreciation, offer whatever possible assistance or resources the organization can have like some next steps laid out for the recipient is also important. And in my own research in particular, we've shown that if the organization is prepared to support with some arrangements like beyond just financial packages, but if there is some training or some job search help or whatever is offered, outplacement help is an offer, then this is also very helpful for managers to have something concrete to offer. It makes the task for them easier, and it can help then, even if the recipient is not maybe able to yet process all the details, but at least that there is somehow steps forward, and it's just not that they walk out without having anything from these meetings. And I think that in this type of situation, what we also know from the extensive research on the delivery of bad news, that preparation is super important for this meeting, so the managers are prepared, that they have a clear message, that they're ready for this negative feedback that they will likely get from the managers, that they're ready for the negative reactions that they're likely to face. And that they, in this preparation, that they really also try to take the perspective of the recipient, what's going on, and what does this imply for them. And I think too there that from my own interviews that the younger managers are more inclined to do that. Actually, they are not yet in they're so much in the corporate bubble or
Yeah.
how should I put it? Maybe not so much yet influenced by the power of their position as the more experienced managers are.
Mhm.
It's easier for them, I think, to take the perspective of the employees and think, what does this imply? And I've had young managers reflecting, well, oh, they have children and they just bought a house, and what will this mean for them? And I mean, this will in some ways increase the burden of the manager. But at the same time, they are maybe more capable of then being compassionate and showing empathy in this type of situation. So thinking of the situation really from the recipient's perspective, I think, is super important.
Yeah, so obviously you mentioned that empathy and compassion and those sorts of things are so important. And also obviously it is a very, very emotional time for lots of people. They are experiencing layoffs or, other bad news. What would you say are some of the common mistakes managers often face when delivering this bad news, and what can these managers do to try and avoid mistakes?
Yeah, I said it's a difficult situation for the managers, so there are also some pitfalls, and in particular, some colleagues in the US have done quite some research on these pitfalls, and I can validate, or I've observed those same pitfalls in my own research and in the interviews that I've carried out as well. So I think one common issue, and this also applies to the context of performance evaluation, is that the manager is not clear about the message.
Okay.
That I mean, just if we think of ourselves, if we are to receive bad news from our employer or from our doctor or something, we would like to know it, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes for manager or many managers, it is not so easy to tell that. And I can say that as a professor who has to be critical of my doctoral students' work, for example, that it's so easy to start to say, well, this could be somehow a bit better, or being a bit too soft about the feedback. So it's good to be clear, but at the same time compassionate about it.
Mhm.
And it's tough. So do not cushion the message, or do not try to dress it up. Or and my colleagues in the US, they have shown in some studies that in some layoff talks, the person who leaves the meeting is not even sure if they've lost their job or not,
Really?
because the message has been so unclear. So this is not the purpose. So that's one thing. The second thing is, as I said, there's very likely a negative reaction from the recipient. A lot of emotions, but they might also be really angry or start challenging, or why me, or arguing. So being prepared for this, and don't let that situation escalate into a fight or argument. I think that's something definitely to be avoided. So when there are the why questions, it's good to have an answer ready. And why me? Why now? Why? That's a normal question in this type of situation. Or what have I done wrong? Or why does it have to be me? So have a answer ready, but don't start discussing it further, because that will then be unproductive for both parties. And then maybe one also common problem there is, or at least has been in the past. I think managers are getting better and better, and organizations are getting better and better, now acknowledging that you need to prepare for this type of issues better, and offer also training for managers. But in the past, in particular, the situations have often been too rushed, or too mechanistic, or too blunt in a way that it's just then you have to be clear with your message, but not too clear in a way that you just drop the news and that's it, basically. Then the situation is just awkward, and it's not dignifying from the perspective of the persons involved. So clear message, but still compassion and respect, and so that everyone can maintain their dignity is important.
And then after that process has happened, you've delivered the bad news, the company has changed, there's an aftermath to deal with.
Sure. Yeah.
And you spoke a little earlier about when I asked about sort of emotional support, and you said, you start that when the company's good, when people are happy, and you build that from there and you create that trust. Obviously, when a company downsizes or you have to let people go, sometimes those things can be shaken. So,
Mm.
what do you think managers can do sort of after these changes, to help sort of reestablish and create that sense of security and that reassurance for those that are still there, the remaining team members,
Mm.
to try
Yeah.
and overcome that uncertainty?
Yeah. This is a very important part of managing change, and in particular change that involves layoffs. There's even this quite hard terminology, I think, the survivors and victims
Yes.
that the academics use. So how you support the survivors in a way in this case. And oftentimes we know from maybe from other literatures that there's this term survivor guilt, that oftentimes they're also like thinking like, why did my colleague or why did my friend lose their jobs, friends lose their jobs, and why am I still here, and
Yeah.
what's going on? So this is really an issue, and I think this also starts very much in a higher level of organization. So what's the strategy for the for the change, or why are these layoffs happening? And if the layoffs are part of a clearly outlined strategy, I think it's easier for everybody involved, the managers and the employees, to understand why this is going on and look into the future. So if we say that we are changing our business this way, and this we leave this side of business, we are not concentrating on that anymore, or it's outdated technology, or whatever is the reason, and that's why we now close down these operations, and this is why these people are losing their jobs. So this makes it easier if we have a clear strategy and the layoffs are part of it, and they are in that way justifiable. But if it's just layoffs for cost saving or layoffs after layoffs, I think then there is a high degree of cynicism, and it's not in the advantage of anyone. And it's more difficult for the managers to support them. They might believe in the change themselves. So then it's very tough to support the employees there. And that's why I think it's super important that the layoffs are planned carefully, and that managers are supported, that managers can also believe in the future of the organization. And only then they can be enthusiastic about their work, and they can build the faith in the employees that, hey, we have a future and this is where we are going. So having this vision and having this plan, strategy, goals, this is what we are out there to achieve now, and this is where we are going. So I think that will make managers' job easier. But it is really an issue, and we know that these survivors, if I use that term, that their commitment is usually lower, and they have higher turnover intentions, and they start looking around, this is a sinking ship, maybe I should jump out and go. So it is really an issue. In terms of concrete measures, I mean, if you can really show that being able to show that this is the direction where we're going, and this might be even a bit contradicting advice, but maybe like being able to offer, for example, training or building something new in the company that shows that, hey, illustrates that we are going into a new direction. And this will, of course, then make it easier to show the future, and that this is really where we are moving to.
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation for both sides, really, and I don't think that is an easy solution. But obviously, you've offered some really practical tips for managers, which will definitely help, even if it is one of those things that's easier said than done. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and hearing all about your research. Yeah, it's really practical, and I think it will help a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having invited me. It was my pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, please do like, share, and subscribe for more. All the articles we discussed can be found on blueskythinking.com, so go and check them out. We'll also link them in the description below. Tune in next week when we will be talking about collaboration. So make sure to tune in for that, and we'll see you soon.